All right, here's what Holland says. The most uncomfortable conversation in the UMC is the stark reality that 99.4% of the global budget comes from the United Methodist Churches, U.S. churches, $134 million a year prior to COVID and U.S. disaffiliations. Despite an anticipated 40% drop in revenue, this percentage will not change. What will change in the percentage of General Conference votes is the percentage of General Conference votes the U.S. has to influence how the money is spent. Currently, the U.S. has roughly 55% of the votes. In 4 years, that will likely flip to 45%. This is the proverbial elephant in the room at General Conference 2024 while we debate regionalization. So he's saying we're going to be talking about regionalization, but the real issue is we're about to lose control of the money that we are giving the vast bulk of. There is a growing sentiment in the U.S. that we will not find a church, that we will not fund a church that constrains our outreach to our local mission field. He's talking about gay stuff, period. Here at Mainstream UMC, we have never heard a group say that the U.S. should not shoulder the lion's share of the global financial burden of the church. From those who have much, much will be required. We support the global church's right to make regional decisions, and we must have the same right for U.S. churches. So this sounds like he's saying, hey, we know it's wrong for people to be saying, I pay this money, you can't tell me how to spend it. But he ends with saying, we should be able to spend it how we want. You know, you guys spend your money how you want. You have your region. We have our region. Let us spend it how we want. The new Global Methodist Church, he says, has addressed the reality of minority vote, majority money, by zeroing out the global mission budget. Instead, they invite the world to join a ceremonial table where they can compete for funding and sponsorships. If they are deemed worthy or garner enough attention, they might get sponsored by the Woodlands. Tom Lambrecht of Good News hails this as, quote, a different way to do mission, end quote. Finally, one thing we can agree upon, it's different. So he's mocking the Global Methodist Church there, just in case it's not clear. He's saying, you know, they're casting aspersions at us for trying to take money away from Africa or not let them determine how we spend it, but they don't even have a shared budget with other parts of the world. They just say, hey, you can support it if you want. So, you know, Holland is saying people like me might cast stones, but am I even sending any money overseas? Am I even partnering? Churches like mine partnering with churches across. Yeah, it's an interesting funding model. It's an interesting thing that we're talking about. How much money is actually going overseas? So he's making the case more United Methodist money is going overseas than Global Methodist money, and ostensibly will continue to be so because the GMC is not mandating that any go over. So this is something where we'll just see in the coming years whether or not the Global Methodist model works better than the United Methodist model. Right now, the United Methodist model is akin to federal government model where you collect a bunch of money and then you shower it out where it's been determined from above. What the Global Methodist Church is saying is we're not going to collect that money. We want you individual churches to decide where you're going to spend it, how you're going to spend it on other Global Methodist churches abroad. And so if you didn't see it, I did an interview with, the gentleman's name is escaping me, but TMC Global is the name of the missionary society where they are positioned themselves. TMC Global is the name of the nonprofit to match individual Global Methodist churches in America up with churches abroad and establish partnerships. So the bigger issue here is the United Methodist model is very impersonal, doesn't create good partnerships between American and non-American churches. It creates this kind of like, this kind of Western, like, we have the money, we will send it to you, and you give us good, feel-good stories. And there's not this mutual vulnerability and getting to know one another and being changed by one another. Hopefully the Global Methodist Church is going to be better. Actually, you know, David Watson feels strongly about this. I and many others feel strongly like Americans are too insulated. We need to know more about the world and know our place in it and realize we're not as important as we think we are. What Holland is doing here is kind of the opposite, is saying, hey, we actually are that important. We give 95% of the budget. Was it 95? Was it 99.4? Yeah, okay. So we give 99.4% of the budget. We deserve to do mission the way we want. How dare they even think about constraining our mission to gay folks over here. I think I've explained mostly what's going on here. Holland goes on, the UMC supports global mission by actually putting it into a quadrennial budget that everyone can count on. We cover the costs of the infrastructure for every Episcopal office. We support global staff and educational facilities. We have the UMC UMCOR on call 24/7. We have an extensive vetting process for our mission partners to facilitate relationships with annual conferences and local churches. We share our mission story through our global communications ministry, and we do this with global. He says all of these will be pared back by necessity at General Conference 2024, but they will not be crassly eliminated. So he's realizing that it puts a bad taste in everybody's mouth to end these things, but he's reminding us we still do so much, so even if we're going to insist on having more influence than the global church on how our money is spent, we're doing great work. Holland says, what puts this funding at risk is our outdated structure that grants regional decision-making only to those outside the U.S. We can ask ourselves a simple question. If those outside the U.S. demanded regional decision-making in 2012 with paragraph 101, why would the U.S. churches feel any differently? Seriously, in this day and age, what organization stays together through coercion? Man, this is the funniest part of this whole article, because Holland has been making the case consistently for coercion in disallowing disaffiliations in the United States even. He is against disaffiliation all the way. He wants to use the trust clause to coerce churches and their people into staying, or at least not leaving with any of their assets that they've built up. So it's hilarious that he is against coercion at this point. He says, true collaboration requires that we share both decision-making and money. People will ultimately vote with their checkbook by withholding money and with their feet by walking out the door. So he's saying, look, if you don't let us decide how our money is going to get spent, we're just going to stop giving the money, or we might leave. And it's the implicit threat at the end. The hypocrisy of all this is United Methodists in other parts of the world, they really haven't been complaining all the way along that Americans have decided where the lion's share of the money goes. That the Americans compose the vast majority of people who sit on the boards and agencies of the general church. Now that the church in Africa is finally ascendant and going to take over, it's only now that privileged white people in the West are going, oh, we need regionalization. We need to respect each other's stuff. And it's not even very opaque. It's so transparent that it's, hey, we want to spend our money how we want. We know that we're shrinking and you're growing. We know that the momentum is with you, but we don't want you to spend our money. It's just icky. Holland goes on, this is exactly what has happened with many traditional churches in the U.S. They did not share the values with the other 75% of the U.S. church. Now, I have to just stop there and take issue. Whenever, what is the organization? It's not UMCOM. UM News. UM News did a statistical report before General Conference 2019 where they looked at the theological identity of United Methodists in America, and they determined in this wonderful pie chart that more than half of the denomination in America was, well, okay, if you looked at conservative and centrist, it was over 60%. I want to say over 70%. But it was definitely a majority of the denominations. So Holland is wrong whenever he says 75% of the U.S. church. He said, so conservatives or traditionalists withheld apportionments for a generation and then withdrew altogether. The link below shows that many of the conferences hit the hardest by disaffiliations were already the annual conferences with the lowest apportionment payout. Now, to say that they had the lowest apportionment payout is not the same as saying they stopped giving. Traditionalist churches all over continued to give, but they registered their complaints, stopped giving to certain funds over time. It was an ineffective strategy, but he's saying we can use the same strategy because they did it first, because two wrongs make a right, right? Whatever. Holland says, moving forward at General Conference 2024, without regional decision-making for those making remaining UMC in the U.S., the apportionment remittances from local churches will either dwindle or stop altogether. The U.S. churches may even move toward creating a UMC USA, similar to the Presbyterians and Lutherans. This is especially true if we are forced to fund the very trials of our LGBTQ siblings and their allies that we want to end. Call it whatever you want. This is our new reality. So he's saying, here's the reality. We're just not going to give you money. You can have a problem with it. You can talk about the past. You can talk about ecclesiology. You can get out your Bibles. But here's the flat truth. We're just not going to pay you money no more. If the Africans are holding the pocket strings, the purse strings, no, we're not going to pay money anymore, and we'll leave, or we'll start our own denomination. After chasing all the traditionalists out, if you don't give us our way, we're gone, and we're going to take our money with us. So give us regionalization. Give us control of our own money, because we're given the vast majority of it anyway. Holland says, regionalization is the only hope of holding together the global mission of the UMC. Voting for the status quo at General Conference 24 will end the church as we know it. The remaining U.S. church has reached a broad consensus to support regional governance, but it will take a 2/3 vote by the entire church global to make it a reality. If there is not a global consensus to trade control for mission, regionalization will fail. Instead of a connectional system sharing in mission and ministry together, we will all be connected in name only. Without regionalization, mission funding will be a dice roll and the games will begin. The funny thing is, regionalization will make it a connection in name only. It's like the opposite of the truth is what he's saying. That when you're actually the church, you share everything. Acts of the Apostles could not be more direct, more clear. And so this balkanization of the church that he and others are recommending is the opposite of the church. It's bizarro church. It's worldly in church, I guess. And so I'm hoping, and I'm actually quite hopeful, that the African church, its delegation, the 1/3 to 2/3 that's actually going to be able to attend because invitations were sent out too late, are going to say, no, we're not going to do this balkanization thing. I'm really hoping that the African church has the courage and the strength and temerity to say, no, we've been doing all this growth here. The rhetoric all along has been in this democratized, no, we're not going to segregate ourselves off to the side. We are all going to be one church, and if you can't handle it, you can leave. And so I don't know if the African delegation will have such strength. I know there's already so much momentum for them to leave and go to the GMC, but there are a lot that are saying, hey, we'll stay, we'll see how General Conference goes, and then based on that, we might leave. So half are just saying, all right, let's make for a paragraph 2553 for African churches and Filipino churches and Eastern European churches that want to go, and then we'll let them have it. But there are others saying, why should we let them have it? Let's just take it. And if Holland is saying they'll just leave, great. Let's see how that works out for them. When the shoe is on the other foot, wouldn't that be interesting if suddenly they are looking at Africans and forcing their own rules on them? That would just be amazing.